Joker Folie à Deux is Todd Phillip's follow-up to his 2019 Joker origin story, in which Joaquin Phoenix won an Oscar as Arthur Fleck. The Joker ended up in Arkham Asylum, and this is where much of the quote-unquote action of this second film is set. Arthur comes across Lee Quinzel, aka Harley Quinn, who he forms a romance with. Meanwhile, he has a trial coming up in which it will be determined whether he was mentally unsound when he committed the murders in the first film. If it can be proven he was in control of his mental faculties, it could be the chair for Arthur Fleck. You know, on my second channel, Cineranta Uncut, subscribe by the way, I have a video coming out soon where I take a look at some successful, critically acclaimed reboots, remakes or sequels whose success is really piggybacking off older, better movies. And when the new films get a sequel, it's Emperor's New Clothes time and the filmmaker is exposed as not being very good. Halloween 2018, for example, was an excellent film, but I'd be the first to say it borrowed massively from previous installments and was a very risk-free film. The sequel must be braver, it must do its own thing, and unfortunately, Halloween Kills was a mess, even though it tried something different. Star Wars The Force Awakens was basically A New Hope repackaged, and the follow-up, which tried to do things different, was not well received. Game of Thrones was unreal until the showrunners caught up with the books, and this phenomenon can be found in other franchises like Jurassic Park. The recent Alien movie was solid too, but it was just a greatest hits version of all the previous Alien films, and I'm sure the next one will not be anywhere near as well received. Which brings us to The Joker 2. The first film was excellent. Sure, it was very surface level with the message it was giving out about poverty, mental health and whatnot, but for what it was, it did a great job. It can't be denied though that the movie borrows massively from two Martin Scorsese films, Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, even bringing along Robert De Niro as a homage. It's so apparent that Scorsese even turned down the chance to produce because he basically said, "I've already made this film." Folie à Deux is Phillip's chance to grow out of that Scorsese influence and truly do his own thing to earn his stripes. But to be fair, even this film has the DNA of a Scorsese flick. I was reminded of Marty's New York, New York, a messy, bloated picture about a dysfunctional couple, and a film with extravagant musical numbers. But all in all, Joker 2 is a major disappointment. I don't think anybody really asked for this film in the first place. The first was a really good standalone picture, but I don't think it was without potential. Joker in Arkham could be great fun. A Joker court trial where he represents himself sounds mouthwatering. Throw in Lady Gaga in there as Harley Quinn and it sounds like you're really cooking now. But what an unrefined, dire, boring film it turned out to be. Without the backing of a Scorsese picture to use as a template, The Joker 2 falls far short of expectations. I will say I appreciate this film in the same manner I appreciated Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, which I watched and reviewed last week. In this day and age, your film gets extra points if it's not content with being a conveyor belt, cookie-cutter corporate product. The fact that it is a departure from the usual superhero fare is worth noting, but that doesn't mean we have to start gushing all over it. At the very least, people are talking about this movie, people are discussing the creative choices, instead of mindlessly watching the Hulk repeatedly punch a robot or something. Movies like The Joker 2 don't really fall into that bracket of films. They enter an arena that Scorsese would call real cinema, and not theme park rides. But this ride takes a long time to get going and doesn't provide many thrills along the way. It's just boring. Honestly, if you want a one-word review from me, that's what I'd say. The movie never really gets going, never really engages. Fleck mopes around Arkham, he meets Harley and the two connect. Then Arthur's trial takes place where he attempts to prove that Arthur Fleck and the Joker are two different people, that he has a multiple personality problem. Then there's a bit of drama at the court, the Joker runs away for about 5 minutes, something happens in the final scene and that's it. It's a very by-the-numbers, mundane set of scenes stretched out into a film almost 2.5 hours long. And in between all of these scenes are excruciatingly dull musical numbers which take place in Fleck's head, where he prances around Arkham singing, sometimes by himself and sometimes with Harley. It was a brave and unconventional decision to make the film a musical, but not a very good decision. I rolled my eyes every time the Joker burst into a song. They weren't even memorable or catchy. The lyrics contained no decent wordplay. There wasn't any memorable choreography, and the fact that we know what we're seeing is happening in Arthur's head takes away any jeopardy, any sense of thrill or danger. And it's not a small part of the film. The musical numbers take up a huge amount of the runtime. But the worst thing about the numbers is that no matter how elaborate they get, they still feel superficial. There's nothing there, no substance. Like, say for example in the first one where there's all the scenes of Fleck romancing his neighbour and later her acting weird towards him. This served a narrative function because of course it's later revealed the romance stuff all happened in his head. Is Phillips even aware that even in musical movies where the numbers are there for just entertainment, they still often progress the plot and move the story forward? The numbers in this film literally brought the snail-like story to a halt every time they came on. They were like YouTube ad breaks. The most relatable moment of this movie was when Arthur said to Lee, "Please stop singing." And they weren't original songs, were they? So it's basically a movie that randomly has karaoke nights. Megalopolis, for all its faults, was bonkers and weird. Joker 2 should have been bonkers and weird. It had all the ingredients for it, but it's just so flat. Like making it a musical was an offhand decision they didn't really think too much about. Lady Gaga does not leave much of an impression as Quinn, seeing as though she is criminally sidelined after the opening 45 minutes or so as we go through Joker's trial. And she's far from the live wire you might imagine her to be, instead coming off as a moody pretender that perfectly encapsulates the film itself. I was not impressed, especially as the only other thing I've seen her in was House of Gucci, where I thought she was great and the best player in the film. The Folie à Deux title is straight up false advertising because she plays such a minimal part, essentially just being an interested fangirl. If you thought you were going to see the two escaping Arkham and wreaking havoc on the streets of Gotham, natural born killer style, then you're in for a snoozy surprise. I didn't pay much attention to the trailers, but I've heard people are really baffled that some interesting looking scenes were cut out of the final film. In the first segment of the movie, during the asylum scenes, and in the trial which takes up much of the film, what the characters are all discussing are the events in the first movie. There's even flashbacks. There's witnesses to Arthur's crimes who take the stand, his neighbour, that little guy. They talk about Arthur's mother a bit, and you can't help but feel this entire film is about people talking about the first film. Nothing that happens in this movie is of any significance, is of any driving factor. It's all stuff that happened in part 1. And honestly, couple that with a few other things, like the shocking $200 million budget when the first one cost about 60 mil but made $1 billion, I can't quite escape the feeling that this movie was a studio-mandated sequel that the Hollywood suits okayed after the success of the first film, and Todd Phillips just went, okay, they're gonna make this anyway, let's give it a go, do something a bit different, and we can all go home with chunky paychecks. And I'll end it in a way to make sure they don't franchise it. It may have the veneer of a prestige movie, the look, the feel, but for me, for what was delivered, honestly, I would label this film as a cash grab. People roasted Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon for having an insane $200 million budget. But why is there not more discussion on the budget for this film? At least with Flower Moon you can see where some of it went. Folie à Deux cost more than each of the recent Dune movies. It's absolute insanity. Everything is a step down from the first one in spite of many of the players being the same. Phoenix is decent, but he wasn't as good as he was before. The music wasn't as good. Even that harsh, Taxi Driver-esque 70s trashy NYC street scene look wasn't emulated in this film as well. And that's for the 3 or 4 scenes that are actually set outside the asylum or the court. Didn't this guy get criticized for making hangover sequels that basically copied the original? I can't say because I didn't see the sequels, but for sure there's too much focus on the events of the first film in this movie, and they don't even go anywhere with it. Phillips is the one who should be on trial. And in terms of the message of the movie, it seems that the film is essentially saying there was no Joker persona. The whole thing with him being a martyr, a savior type figure, it was all a farce, and sorry, but all he was a mentally unwell, delusional Arthur Fleck. Maybe the real Jokers were the people he inspired along the way, kind of thing. It is a demystification process, a demythologizing work. But to me, this conclusion feels predicated on a strawman argument, because I don't think anyone seriously came away from the first movie thinking the Joker was a character to be admired and emulated, aside from some edgy teenagers, a media narrative, and ironic memes. Does Todd know that people weren't actually going out dressing up as the Joker and committing anarchy? So it's another area where the movie feels unearned. I feel like this movie hates me and its protagonist and wants me to feel bad for my prejudices, but it can't quite remember what those prejudices were. If this was a sequel in a long line of sequels, let's say the Joker had about 6 film entries, I might not be as hard on it. Oh, that's the one that was a musical, I might say. But it's clearly intended as a conclusion to Fleck's story. But unfortunately, it doesn't get anywhere near the heights of the first film. So if there was anyone out there crazy enough to wonder, no, Todd Phillips is not the new Martin Scorsese. I feel like there's some good vignettes here, some DVD extras, some bonus content for the first film, a few musical numbers you might find on the film studio's YouTube channel, just for a bit of entertainment. But a cohesive, engaging motion picture it did not make. With every burst into a song, I felt my screening slip deeper and deeper into depression. There was a real aura of dejectedness. It's a movie where very little happens and which ultimately feels pointless. What did you think of this movie? Let me know down in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.